Welcome to Urbinary, the podcast exploring how we understand and live urban spaces.
Urbinary.
Join us as we walk through a journey of self-reflection on our positionality within our university and our field of study.
Today, we led you into the third episode of this new season, Finding Our Place, Navigating Urban Lenses and the Hybrid Story of Floods. Follow our footsteps and discover what we have to share.
Urbinary.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Urbinary. My name is Stella and I'm here with Giulia. We are both early career researchers at Politecnico di Milano in the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies. I'm a PhD candidate in urban planning, design and policy here at Politecnico, researching the territorial impacts of water infrastructure policies in Italy. My work focuses on urbanization, infrastructure and socio-ecological inequalities using historical, ecological and Marxist approaches.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Stella. Let me briefly introduce myself before now we dive in. I'm an urban planner and postdoctoral researcher at Politecnico, focusing my research on the so-called nature-based solutions and their implementation in urban and territorial contexts to address social and ecological challenges of our contemporary landscapes. I think that our research teams shared significant common ground, and I can say it's been thought-provoking to give them a voice through today's conversation. But now let's get started and begin our journey.
Urbinary.
Among the words that today have gathered the potential to describe the condition of the contemporary world, urban is one of the most powerful. One may assume that such potential corresponds to an absolute clarity of meaning, a clear line of demarcation that allows us to confidently separate urban objects from those that are not. The urban from rural, the urban from the natural, the urban from everything that is not. As urban studies and urban planning researchers, the common denominator of the research outputs we strive to produce lie precisely in the urban nature of the objects we choose as the central focus of our study. It will come as no surprise then that in this journey of reflecting on our positionality within the broad framework of our work, a moment is dedicated to this question. What is ultimately the urban, and above all, why do we dedicate ourselves to studying it with such commitment?
I remember in the months leading up to the release of this episode, how often we kept circling back to the question of what the urban really means. This question arises from many smaller sub-questions we have asked ourselves together. The urban can be many things, so which ones, for example? Or, in the context of an urban problematic that is becoming increasingly burdensome, where communities are becoming more and more urbanized, much of the discourse is categorized in dominant terms like hinterland, rural, wilderness. Are these categories still usable today? And above all, what critical lenses are we excluding when we think of the urban? We do all of this for scientific reasons, of course, but not only. We also done it because the outcome of this research concerns us closely.
Let me expand on that. This is not a trivial definitional exercise within the academia. Opening the discussion on the different definitional frameworks of the urban is a crucial step in understanding the political potential of our research. Let me explain more clearly. The decision to understand the urban as a static condition of spatial organization or as a process of spatial restructuring and territory production can significantly influence the way we read the vulnerability of existing social relations in the territory and the search for emancipatory and historically contextualized alternatives. This also translates into another equally important aspect, the theoretical framework of the urban that we adopt, as the potential to renew and guide planning tools and public policies.
We decided to explore the concept of the urban by looking at what happens when different interpretative perspectives, what we'll refer to epistemological lenses, are applied. Through these lenses, alternative visions of the urban emerge, as well as alternative versions of the story itself. The narrative shifts and reshapes depending on the lens through which it's analyzed. To illustrate this, we focus on a specific case, the devastating floods that hit Emilia-Romagna region between May 2023 and October 2024. By analyzing this event through different epistemological lenses, we uncover new meanings and interpretation of the relationship between urban and its surrounding territory.
Urbinary.
Let's start here. It's 2007. It's the year of the publication of the United Nations second report. The urban population has surpassed the 50% of the global population, reaching about 3.3 billion people. The impact of this data on academia and planning is striking. Welcome back to the urban age, they say it at London School of Economics. The age in which cities, which are the defining force of spatial organization, expanding relentlessly and overtaking the rural. Cities, driven by both demographic and economic forces, embody a positivistic aspiration for improvement, a notion that remains deeply embedded in the curriculum of our university where we work, study, and, as you do, teach. We are often envisioned as the preeminent central place for economic development, innovation, culture, and the resolution of social and climate conflicts. And so, urban and city become synonymous. The urban it sees as a bounded settlement, a static organization of space where changes are expressed through quantitative variables. This universal perspective risks oversimplifying urbanity, overlooking key elements essential for grasping its complexity. Where, in fact, does the understanding of urbanization process resides, and their dynamic that transform territories? Their expansion beyond the so-called urban areas, how far does it extend? What does it entail in terms of the organization of social and cultural dynamics?
We can say for certain that urban age is the hegemonic reading of the urban today. This thesis would require more in-depth investigation. However, we do know that there are multiple epistemological lenses of the urban that, especially in planning, are quite unpopular when compared to the urban age framework. We had the opportunity of discussing this idea with Camilla Perrone, an associate professor of Tecnica e Pianificazione Urbanistica at the University of Florence. Her work is deeply rooted in the territorial school, the theory of extended urbanization, and urban political ecology. Yet, it's the generative potential of innovation within her approach that truly stands out. Her perspective, which she called territorial political ecology, represents a critical attempt to turn reflections on urbanization into new tools for planning. Urbanization, she argues, is both a planetary process and a deeply specific one, anchored in the materiality of each territory.
Urbinary.
Theories that view urbanization as a process of organizing and reorganizing space focus on its dynamic and historically situated nature. For instance, the theory of planetary urbanization and extended urbanization approach urbanization as a dialectical process. Concepts like concentrated, extended, and differential urbanization highlight different gradients of spatial restructuring unfolding across multiple scales.
Food, water, energy, and raw materials must be brought to urban centers, requiring logistics system and information network. Conversely, extended urbanization areas can evolve into new centralities, and both modalities deal with processes of differential urbanization that are unevenly churning segment spaces, leading to commodification, incorporation, creation and generation certain times of new centralities. So you see, I described a very dynamic process where natural flows and resources intertwine with the material and the materialization of processes which are economic, which are market driven, capital driven, and so forth. And everything happens at the same time, landing in a certain places in a very specific way. And this is what can make consistent differences between one place to another one. We cannot miss in our work, in our studies, okay? Because we use just one lens or another one to look at what is happening. If I go to Ghana, I want to use the lens of gentrification, for example, to understand processes. Maybe I risk to miss a lot of information about the dynamics that are happening in this area of the world. Maybe we need a different vocabulary to describe or to better to understand what's going there, in the sense of analyzing processes that are destroying that places, in the sense of detecting processes that are rebuilding these places, that are making possible a new way of life, a new way of producing, etc., etc.
moments of concentration and moments of expansion coexist. It's clear by now. But this means that processes driving the production of the urban don't have clear boundaries defining what's inside and what's outside the city. It's precisely this dialectic between the external and internal that lies at the heart of the foundational insight of urban political ecology, or at least its first wave, the dialectic of the socio-natural metabolism. But what does that actually mean? The socio-natural metabolism refers to how human settlements, like cities for instance, extract resources, transform them and feed them back into the environment, constantly reshaping both nature and society in this process. It's a circular flow, but it's far from being neutral. It's deeply embedded with power dynamics. Who decide how nature is used? Who reaps the benefits and who bears the cost, often in forms of social inequalities or environmental degradation. Understanding the socio-natural metabolism isn't just about mapping flows of resources. It's about questioning the political and economic forces that shape them.
So the urban political ecology gives us the lens to study and to see how capital and nature relates each other, and so enable us to find the roots of the crisis, which are the climate crisis. This crisis can happen everywhere, and the crisis usually is a response to something. Okay, so in this case, some things relate to urbanization processes, and if we are stuck in the old epistemological lenses and categories, we think that capitalism is or the effect of capitalism are visible just in the city and what we were used to define as a city from the 19th and 18th century categories. But it's not like that, because what we see is that for example, the case of Emilia-Romagna in Italy shows us that most of the problems happens in non-urban places. Okay, so and this reinforces this idea that urbanization processes are not concentrated in agglomeration, are not just where the city is located, but urbanization processes relates all the planet, everywhere.
Urbinary.
Just to recap, the theory of extended urbanization allows us to see urbanization not as something confined within city boundaries, but as a process, planetary. Yes, but one that materializes in territories with specific characteristics. This perspective allows us to trace how some processes impact regions far beyond city limits, creating vulnerabilities in places we wouldn't traditionally define as urban, and connecting city fragilities to processes happening well outside city administrative boundaries.
Exactly. When we apply the lens of urban political ecology, we add another dimension to this understanding. This perspective unveiled the power dynamics embedded in these processes. Decisions about water, land use, and infrastructure development are often driven by capital, privileging certain groups and territories while leaving others increasingly exposed to risk and amplifying the effects of extreme weather events.
I think that this brings us to the concept of territory, the final one we need to address. As Camilla Perrone told us, in the territorialist approach, territory is not merely a physical space, but a complex, dynamic process. It's an ecosystem. It's shaped by the interplay of natural, social, and economic forces over time, and its vulnerabilities to events like floods are deeply tied to how these processes unfold.
Understanding territory as a socio-natural process allows us to see that the floods in Emilia-Romagna are not isolated incidents, but symptoms of a larger systematic crisis, one that calls for new epistemological lenses and planning tools capable of addressing the deeply intertwined dynamics of urbanization, nature, and power.
And the urban political ecology that I recall in my work, territorialist political ecology, is a way to make aware, especially planners who have to give responses, that we cannot plan by designing lines. Okay, we cannot plan by considering administrative units. We have to plan processes. We have to plan having in mind the kind of effects that processes have on certain places, how processes materialize, the possibility of this, and the richness of local cultures which have been built over decades, over years, centuries, and that usually brings or can bring innovation. This is why specificity is crucial, okay? Because and also in this territorialist approach is crucial. So the way each community is able to rebuild its future is very specific, okay? It depends on the story and the history of that places, and it's different from the capacity of other communities in other places, okay? So, but usually, if you go there and have a look, you see that this capability of community and places to react to crisis is really respectful of the natural resources, of the earth, of the land. Okay, it's based on metabolic flows which are positive, which contributed to the production and the reproduction of the territory. Okay, which are not destroying, but producing and reproducing. Okay, building. So, to conclude, a territorialist political ecology is a way to offer planners a conceptual tool to plan processes, long-last processes, instead of things, instead of instead of pieces of the cities, of the territories we live in.
Planning processes, not just lines on a map, something lasting, something truly rooted in the unique stories and the resources of each place. But what happens when poor planning overlooks this? Let's explore a case that highlights these challenges.
Urbinary.
The floods of 2023-2024 in Romagna and Bologna weren't just about heavy rain. That's the easy answer. Dig a little deeper and you find a perfect storm of poor management, rampant land consumption, and decades of uncontrolled urbanization. The heart of it all? Political choices that turned a natural event into a full-blown disaster. We discussed all of this in two in-depth interviews with Paolo Pileri, full professor of Pianificazione Territoriale e Ambientale at the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies, Politecnico di Milano. Paolo Pileri has dedicated much of his academic career to the issue of soil consumption and, more recently, published the book Parte del suolo, l'ecosistema invisibile. The starting point of our conversation with him was the 2017 Regional Law of Soil Consumption in Emilia-Romagna. We asked him to help us understand why this law remains ineffective in achieving its ecological goals and mitigating hydrological risks, considering that the region is still one of the largest consumers of soil in Italy. Let's listen to some brief moments from our meeting.
I think that, and I say it with a big pain, I think that the case of Emilia-Romagna is the demonstration of the failure of the current urban planning philosophy that is based on a planning decision without a strong ecological perspective, I think. What happened in Romagna, I think that is also the result of local decisions on land use completely without any coordination, okay? I think that the regional law of that region is on soil consumption failed in its goal to stop and even to limit land consumption. In fact, recent data by ISPRA, that is the National Environmental Agency in Italy, demonstrate that this region is the first one in Italy for net land consumption. It's incredible. I think that this is due to several factors combining together. First, you have to know that there has been a late application of the law, 6 or 7 years after 2017. And in the meanwhile, the land consumption went on first. Then there were too many, a lot of exceptions. For instance, the regional political power could decide to realize infrastructures or plans without respecting any limitation for land consumption. That's really very incredible. And finally, they fix a limit of 3% of new land consumption. That is a limit that doesn't work at all, because it permits to go on consuming land in the same rate as in the past for others 5 to 10 years. And then the famous limit of 3% has been made in a way that the municipalities could go on consuming soil. And in the same time, that law didn't decide any new architecture of the decision on the treatment of the soil, on the treatment of the ecological crisis. Even in the flooded area in Romagna, the 80% of the land consumption in Romagna was based in the flooded area without any limitations. So really, that law was completely inadequate to the current time.
The structure of a regional law may seem like a complicated mechanism, worlds apart from Camilla Perrone's reflections. But that's exactly the point. The current urban planning philosophy, lacking a solid ecological perspective, is fundamentally flawed. It fails because it ignores a critical connection. Land consumption is an integral part of urbanization, and not the neat, orderly kind that respect administrative boundaries and compromises on timelines, but a chaotic, messy urbanization where multiple scales collide in the exploitation of natural resources. Process that, in the end, leave behind unequal politic impacts, hitting territories and communities in vastly different ways.
Exactly. Let's skip over the delays, they speak for themselves. One example Paolo Pileri mentioned in our interviews say it all. Exception to the law made to favor infrastructure or regional political projects, justified by a vague public interest. This is how the logistics hubs are proliferating in Emilia-Romagna.
That's true, but beside logistic hub, the problems run deeper, involving mobility infrastructure and other projects that are, at times, even supported by parts of the community. Take the Rastignano Junction, for example. As highlighted in Pascal Bernhardt's documentary Romagna Tropicale, it reveals a divide within the community. Some see the infrastructure as a solution to simplify commutes to the city, while others fear it will only worsen flood risks.
Yes, to understand what's happening in these territories in response to land transformation, we need to move beyond the oversimplified idea of who's right and who's wrong. The reality is much more complex. It's about communities that are only now beginning to rediscover their own territory. The documentary Romagna Tropicale sheds light on this complexity too. Local struggles and internal divisions over territorial changes fueled by an unsustainable development model. We spoke with the documentary film director to learn more.
Dopo l'ultima alluvione c'è tutto un insieme di collettivi, Bologna for Climate Justice, Plat, tutto quanto queste realtà che loro attraverso, andando lì nei posti che tra l'altro a Bologna non era mai successo che ci fosse un esubero d'acqua del genere.
After the recent flood, a number of collectives, including Bologna for Climate Justice, have been helping to understand the phenomena. Bologna had never experienced such an excess of water, and the urban area found itself in such great difficulty. These collectives are providing support, and through this solidarity work, they are uncovering the characteristics of the territory together with local communities. Historically, all the water beneath Bologna was channeled and redirected toward the Apennines behind the city. Many people were unaware of this.
Loro stessi stanno scoprendo come è fatto il loro territorio, cioè, nel senso del fatto che sotto Bologna sono tutto un insieme di hanno incanalizzato tutte le acque che passano sotto Bologna, arrivano all'Appennino che sta lì dietro e tanta gente non lo sapeva.
From Pascal's words, it's clear that local communities often struggle to grasp the full scope of the issue. The connection between land consumption and territorial transformation is missing, and urbanization processes, especially those distant or seemingly disconnected from natural resources, aren't recognized as key factors in understanding hydrological risks.
Land consumption causes disaster right before their eyes, but the same issue is not connected to the large-scale processes of urbanization, land cementification. Many communities fail to make this connection. I believe it's clear that we need to rethink at this point how we understand territory. We explored this issue with Camilla Perrone. We explained how adopting the lens of a political ecology helps us to unpack the climate crisis, exposing inequalities in its impacts and revealing how capitalist processes reshape nature in its entirety. Let's listen 3 moments from her interview.
Depends on how we understand the problems. And again, it brings us back to the epistemological lenses we use to understand the urbanization processes and the processes in themselves, whatever they are, if they relate the climate conditions, environmental situations, or more, let's say, urban situations. So until we stay in this idea that the river and what happens in a certain area where the river resonates, if we still think that it's not something that relates the urban or the urban as a process, we still continue bordering these problems in the way you said. Okay, so the technicality, the managerial approach, which is sectorial and too specific in this case, too much with reference to the problem, we will contribute to reproduce that disasters, the conditions for that disasters to happen. We have to cut this circle, which is a vicious circle. Okay, so this is a crucial point. It is crucial in the way in which understand the urbanization processes, and it's crucial when we try to look at the urbanization processes under the lens of political ecology. Okay, when we mobilize this political ecological component, we are entering the climate crisis. Actually, we are entering the discourse about how to react to the or how to understand better the climate crisis. Okay.
This brings us back to a groundbreaking realization. If we remain stuck in overly technical and fragmented approaches, we risk reproducing the very condition that fuel these disasters. Instead, we probably need to rethink how we approach and study urbanization, the specific way it transforms territories and the complex mechanisms that shape territories themselves. This must begin with a critical reflection on the lenses, methods, and tools used by planners and policymakers. This shift requires moving beyond technicalities and embrace a cultural transformation, one that recognizes the deep interconnectedness of social and natural systems. During our interviews, these needs become particularly evident through the more than human approach, which highlights the agency and the importance of natural entities in shaping social, cultural, and political processes.
Obviously, we could start doing two things. The first, I think that we have to imagine many ways to give a voice to what has no voice. For instance, the soil has no voice, and we can give our voice to the soil to protect, because the soil is fragile and at the same time is a crucial ecosystem for the planet. But I repeat, the soil, the nature, the woodland need our voice to protect them and to let people understand why soil is so important.
Well, it's not simple at all to say that, but of course, if I have to be consistent with my argument, let's say, I have to say that the soil plays a crucial role. But as any actor, the soil needs to be enabled, needs to gain agency, to gain actorship, okay? If people, planners, technicians, whoever acts on the soil instead of with the soil, I think this shift from acting and planning processes instead of areas, zones, is not really successful, will be not really successful, okay? So
Urbinary.
What can further be observed looking at the climate crisis and its human geography of action is a cultural transformation that also involves a growing number of citizens increasingly engaged in activism. These are efforts, better say vows, rooted in a vision of how things could be different. This brings with a significant portion of local community self-determination, which we urgently need in the production and reproduction of the territory. We present brief moments from a much longer conversation with Davide Castaldo, a researcher and activist in the climate resistance movement Ultima Generazione. Through the non-violent actions they carry out in cities, they have been extensively involved in advocating for the rights of flood victims and their legitimate demands. We also discussed their primary objective, the repair fund.
So how come that our politicians or other institutions haven't take action to prevent this happening again? Because again, we know that these extreme events will come over again and again. What we have to do now is trying to prevent the risks and also give people safe places to stay. Yeah, the Repair Fund is the goal of our current campaign, in which basically we are asking for a repair fund against destructions and harms of floods, landslides, or heat waves, which is a stable fund funded by the state with money coming from basically fossil fuel economy and subsidies that the state gives to fossil fuel economies, or profits that the fossil fuel economy in which the state is participating is gaining. Is a fund of 20 billion, which is a lot of money if you think of that, but at the same time is the actual order of magnitude that we need for the time being. But the thing is that behind the Repair Fund, there is also the idea that we need the state to take responsibility for these events, because it's not fault of the old lady living in the countryside of Campi Bisenzio if she got flooded twice in 2 years. And this is also something that we should start to realize. So another question is, okay, but if we need both, so if we need both a repair fund and a way to really tackle this problem from a scientific and economic point of view, how do we do it? Of course, it is a huge problem, but we should start thinking that it's not true that money that we have now is worth more than money we will have in the future. Meaning that this failure in terms of economic order of magnitudes in 20 years from now will be trillion in the global market. Okay, so if we think of that, makes no sense to deciding right now to not really going all in on this problem. And this is really central in this discussion, because people, of course, cannot afford the cost of this transition. So we need a public repair fund, but this transition must happen, as far as we know, in 3-4 years from now on.
Urbinary.
Well, I wish we had more time to delve deeper into this case. Probably because I feel we are just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. I personally find the themes related to territorial political ecology particularly inspiring. These are ideas I think that deserve to be further developed, especially when thinking about the future of my personal research and the application in nature-based solution fields. What I found fascinating about the territorialist approach is how it begins with the study of the history of the territory to identify the transformative rules that have shaped each over the long term. We can decode not only the rules of reproduction and evolution, but also how those transformations help us to understand where discontinuities and persistence lie. It's a method that allows us to envision a territorial approach to climate action and resilience, something I wish I intend to incorporate into my teaching in the master's program of Sustainable Architecture and Landscape at Politecnico di Milano. Also because I often think about how these insights are not accessible to citizens, and perhaps not even to the practitioners we train at Politecnico. How many of them truly understand what it means to conserve soil or improve air quality? Bridging this gap doesn't just mean raising awareness. It means providing people with the tools to become active participants, ready to face the future, not as spectators, but as protagonists.
I like that. So it's like saying that mapping the territory isn't enough, right? Maybe we also need to build awareness of how to transform it.
Yeah, you're right. It's a process of empowerment that starts with access to information and culminates in a collective action. And you, what are you thinking about?
Well, hard to say. Just before Christmas, I had the chance to attend a lecture by Christian Smith in Florence. And at one point, he showed a slide that defined the process of urbanization with this huge and amazing clarity. And he highlighted three crucial aspects: spatial practices, territorial regulation, and lived space and everyday life, which is one only thing. And I think that it really struck me because, it's a synthesis that he explained beautifully in his latest work, and of course it has a lot in common with Lefebvre concepts. And probably you remember that we also discussed about it with Camilla Perrone, do you? And she told us how these three dimensions have become central to her way to interpreting territories, thanks to the use of these critical lenses, these epistemological lenses that we analyze today together.
So you said spatial practices, territorial regulation, and lived space and everyday life, correct?
Yes, you're right, exactly. Reflecting on these three dimensions, I think that they can offer a solid framework for tackling the challenges of designing a research project. One that can narrate a territory cut between planetary dynamics and local specificities. Perhaps by analyzing this territory this closely through the so-called engaged research, the mediated product of these three dimensions that we can trace and bring back into our studies may help us identifying the places and the practice where transformative power resides.
So are you saying that, as Professor McGregor suggests, it's not just about producing knowledge or testing epistemological lenses, but about spotting those cracks, those spaces where new possibilities can emerge?
Perhaps the real challenge of research is learning how to see those cracks and then figuring out how to nurture them. Yes, I think that this is what urban planning should start doing.
Urbinary.
Our journey comes to an end, yet the question remains. As we navigated through Politecnico, finding our places, we reflected on the delicate challenges of applying ecological epistemological lenses to urban interpretation. How can planners break free from static, outdated frameworks to embrace dynamic processes that not only respect but also amplify the unique histories, ecologies, and socio-natural dynamics of each territory? Are we truly ready to dismantle the tools of conventional urban planning and reimagine a practice that designs non-neutral living processes?
But while our journey pauses here, a new one begins for Isabella, Goari, and Aubrey. So stay tuned for the upcoming episodes, where we'll follow them walking around urban studies in their episode titled Finding Our Place Inside, Outside, in the Orbit of Academia.
Urbinary.
Urbinary is produced in collaboration with Poliradio and the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano.